Hi, my name is Deanna Blanco. I am a Flexibility Script certified flexibility therapist, as well as a NASM certified personal trainer, a 200-hour RYT yoga teacher, and an aerial and group exercise instructor. Today I'm going to talk to you about myofascial release and how you can use it to help yourself and your students. What is myofascial release? Myofascial release is often called SMR, self-myofascial release. It is a self-massage technique that you can use to release the fascia throughout the body. When we talk about the fascia, a simple way to talk about it with students is to describe a sausage. A sausage, the inside is the muscle. The exterior of the sausage, that covering, that would be likened to our fascia. The fascia is surrounding a muscle tissue. If that fascia is tight, has trigger points, knots, or adhesions, those can prevent the muscle beneath from performing their full activation or range of motion, therefore affecting your ability to stretch and move in your daily activities. By stimulating your muscle receptors via sustained pressure on the fascia, one can aid in the release of these trigger points, allowing for better results from other flexibility techniques, such as static, active isolation, and PNF stretching. Why should we use myofascial release for our students? Myofascial release can restore their range of motion, increase their efficiency, prevent premature fatigue, chronic pain, and limit poor performance. Who can do this? Most of our general fitness population can and should be using myofascial release techniques on a regular basis, with a few notable exceptions. So you should speak to your students, ask if they have certain conditions, or ask them ahead of class, please let me know what conditions you have. That way you're sure that you're doing the right techniques for them. Some very notable things to think about when it comes to myofascial release counterindications are people who have osteoporosis, osteomyelitis, malignancy, blood clots, cellulitis, phlebitis, acute rheumatoid arthritis. So you always need to be aware with your elderly population, because osteoporosis and rheumatoid arthritis are two things that are very present in that population. Hematoma or localized infection, open wounds. Never be releasing the fascia on open wounds. Skin lesions, a fracture that would be healing, an obstructive edema, or advanced diabetes. It's always best, if you're not sure, to ask your physician first or have your student consult their physician. When should you do your myofascial release? Ideally 2 to 3 times per week or on an as-needed basis. For example, I have an iliopsoas that gets tight. I begin to feel it in my low back, so I'll decide to go ahead and do some myofascial release, and usually I feel an immediate benefit from those exercises. How should you do myofascial release? Myofascial release is doing self-massage using tools like foam rollers, lacrosse balls. So we have a foam roller here. Lacrosse ball, you can get one of these for $3 on Amazon. This one is a little more firm. You can also use a tennis ball, although sometimes, depending on the weight, you can crush a tennis ball. This is called a pinky ball. Children actually used to play with these. They're a little more soft and have some give to them. This is a rock ball. This is one that we show. It's a little harder, and there is releases that you can use for your iliopsoas with this. Or a peanut. Now you can buy these pre-made, or you can make your own. This is using hockey tape and 2 lacrosse balls. Techniques such as pressure waving, smashing and flossing, contracting and relaxing can all be used when performing myofascial release. While a full flexibility assessment, checking for imbalances, weakness, and a loss of range of motion is always best, course of action before beginning a myofascial release session, we can still explore some of the most common areas in need of release in our average fitness population. So with that in mind, we have some general things that we know for most people become tight areas. First one would be our levator scap. So your levator scap is often tight and can lead to lack of range of motion in the neck. There is a test for this. Basically, you look right, kind of take note of how far you can turn your neck. Look left, take a mental note of how far you can turn your neck. Then raise those shoulders up, see if you can go further than you did before. And if you can, usually that means that your levator scap is tight and it's pulling into the 3 connection points in your cervical spine, your neck area. So let me show you the first release for our levator scap. This one, I tend to use my lacrosse ball. It's a little firm, so if you don't like a lacrosse ball, there is softer foam ones, but you need something about the size of a tennis ball or a lacrosse ball in order to get into this area. So the area that we're targeting is right about here. How do we get into that area effectively? We use our floor. So I always use a yoga mat, and the reason why is on a bare floor, this wants to slide away more. So using a yoga mat, I'll go ahead and come down. Make sure you can see. Neutral spine is important here, and I always keep my knees bent when I'm doing this release. That way I'm supporting my low back. From here, it is very important that we do this with a proper technique with our hand. The first thing I start is making a blade out of my hand. I take my hand straight up over the shoulder area, and I'm just gonna slide that away. Perhaps it will fall. There it goes. Try to touch the floor. For some people, you may not touch the floor. Then come back on my exhale and slide just by my right hip. On my inhale, going towards the floor. On my exhale, back towards the hip. In this position, I would take about 10 times going through this, inhaling just like we would in yoga as we extend, exhaling as we contract. Now, the next technique I would take is trying to make a letter Y. So kind of tell my students, think YMCA. So my thumb is going to come out 45 degrees, touch the floor, and then my pinky is going to come towards my opposite side hip. Thumb to floor, pinky towards opposite side hip. Once again, I would repeat that position about 10 times with the breath, exhaling as I close, inhaling as I open. The next technique would be to flip the hand so the palm of the hand is facing away from the body now. So you think pinky to floor, thumb towards opposite hip, pinky to floor, thumb towards opposite hip. Now today that area for me isn't tight and I don't really feel like it's doing much, but you'll know and your students will know and you'll hear the groans and faces when it's kind of a hurt so good type of release that you will get into when you work this. When you come back up, oftentimes you can ask students, go ahead and turn your neck left and right. See if you can go a little further than you could before. A lot of times you're going to hear, yes, that's amazing. Now, one of the reasons that release is really helpful for us is we spend our day looking at our phones. We spend our day in a very closed position, whether we are driving, looking at a phone, reading a book, working at a desk. Either way, we don't open our body up enough, so this area becomes tight and pulls in the muscles. By releasing that fascia, the muscle beneath can be restored to its proper range of motion. So let's move on. Our next area that I want to talk to you about is your pectoralis major and minor. For that one, I also use a lacrosse ball. Sometimes, depending on the student, if they're more body mass, I might go ahead and get into a larger ball. Either this one is called a rock ball that you can buy on Amazon, and it's a little bit spiky. It doesn't have very much give to it. Or a larger softball that's smoother. Either way, one of these will work for you. So I'm going to show it using my lacrosse ball. So our pectoralis major pec muscle is located in the chest area. Pectoralis minor is in this area. Now, that can be an area that, once again, if we're looking down, closed, is hard to open up and release. Gentlemen, especially if they do a lot of bench pressing, get really tight pecs. A lot of ladies that I personally know as aerialists get very tight in our pec minor area. So this can affect our shoulder range of motion and can even lead to neck pain because your neck wants to jet forward when this area is tight. So come on down. This time, I'm going to lay on my belly. I'm going to place it right underneath my pec area. I'm going to place my arm, shoulder, and elbow in alignment, and my arm is at 90. I'm going to turn my head away from you, use my other hand to gently press into the floor, and then I'm going to rock here, adding pressure. And I take about a minute in each area. It takes about 30 seconds for our Golgi tendon organ reflex within the muscle spindles to begin releasing. So that's why most techniques are done for at least a minute. At this point, I might rest my head down, take my arm out to extension, and I'm going to slide through my range. If I want additional pressure, I can use my left hand to press again, sliding up and down. I can even reach and go down and work that area until you feel that release happen. So that would be our pec major and pec minor release area using our lacrosse ball. Next, we're going to move on to our quadriceps. And for our quadriceps, we're going to be using our foam roller. So, talk about foam rollers briefly. In most fitness studios, they tend to have these long, black, firm foam rollers. They last the best for long-term use. Although I've had this one for years and it lasts too, but the studios tend to buy one size. They're much taller and they're harder. So oftentimes students might feel like they're a little bit too much on the quads or the body. One way that we can try to make those foam rollers work better for us, that I've used at my studio that I teach at, is to take and wrap it with the yoga mat, thus adding a little more of a soft surface, and then I roll from here. If that doesn't work for you, then you just go ahead and use that foam roller, whichever one you have, but one thing you can do is instead of laying on it, is press. If a student is saying that's too much for me, you have them sit up and roll almost like we're rolling out cookie dough, okay? But this OPTP roller I got on Amazon is one of my favorites. It's just the right size. I'm gonna come here. Once again, when we are foam rolling, we never roll on a joint capsule directly. So we would never roll on our elbow, our knee, our actual hip joint. That is not something that we do. We are targeting the fascia above the muscles. So, with that in mind, I'm going to pop my left leg slightly forward, come down to my forearms. Notice that I'm not arching my back, but I'm flat back here, so I am belly button to spine. It is a little bit of planking. I'm going to start at the top of my hip, roll all the way down, just short of my knee joint, come all the way back up. You may find you travel a little, so like I just traveled a little, and I want to be in line with my camera right now, so I'm going to come back down. I'll go the length of my leg, maybe 5 to 8 times. While I'm doing this, I'm noting any special or extra tight areas. I note if I go across a knot. A lot of times you can feel them, they'll feel like a speed bump. If you find a knot, then you want to stay on that area and do some gentle rocking, focusing longer on that area, at least 30 seconds. Remember, we're trying to stimulate that Golgi tendon organ reflex to allow the muscle to release and go back to its range of motion. If you find that you want to get deeper, which for me today, my quads feel great, so I can get a little deeper. I can bring my leg up, bending and straightening the knee. Now, if you have really tight quads, you may find this technique right here unbearable. At that point, I just point and flex my foot. If it doesn't allow for that range of motion yet to happen. Just rolling. Obviously, we would do both sides. Whatever you do on one side, you should do on the other. Today, for time's sake, I'm only doing one side. So, next, we're gonna talk about the TFL, which is our tensor fascia latae, and I believe I'm pronouncing it wrong, but it's your TFL for short. And that's that area that is between the top of your leg and beneath your iliac crest. So your iliac crest is right here. You feel this bony part just before you go soft into your obliques. This area right here, and there's a little pocket of meaty side of the hip area. That's what we're targeting. So with that in mind, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to roll on this area. So I'm going to turn so that I can still face you. Come down onto that hip area. Now I'm going to stay in that pocket. You'll notice I bent my bottom leg. So for my TFL release, I bend my bottom leg. My forearm is not sinking. Keeping my neck nice and lengthened. Don't allow the shoulder to come up into your head area. So from here, I can do gentle, it's a very small rock back and forth. Or the technique that I find that's better for most students is to stay in this one spot and we close and then open. And you'll notice it's slightly, we're moving slightly forward into the hip and slightly back towards the glute. Staying here for a whole minute. Closing with the exhale, inhale to open. We would repeat this on both sides of the body. Now the benefit for releasing this TFL area is a lot of times students might complain that their low back is bothersome and achy. One of the areas that could be pulling into your low back is your TFL. So a lot of times when you feel a pain in this particular area of your body, it's not actually coming from that area. It's a referred pain from elsewhere. So we release the muscles around that area, therefore allowing the range of motion to return, and pain often disappears. So that is the TFL. A lot of times you'll hear people want to do the side of the leg, which is the IT band. That is another area you can do. I would use a slightly different technique for my IT band. Instead of bending the bottom leg, I straighten the bottom leg. Top leg comes over, and I roll to just to the top of that leg where the femur ends, to just above the knee. And you'll notice I'm not down on the forearm, my arm is extended for this one. Same thing, if you find a spot, a spicy spot or a knot, you would rock back and forth, allowing for greater release for at least 30 or 40 seconds. Another thing you can do is bend and straighten. When you do this and you're trapping the tissue, you do something that we call in myofascial release a paper clipping effect. And this paper clipping effect inside the muscle fibers causes them to slide against each other, thus creating greater release. So moving on to our next area is our iliopsoas. I find that often people say, let's release our hip flexor, open our hip flexor, hip flexor, hip flexor, hip flexor. And they stretch and stretch and stretch, and they're not getting anywhere with their stretching, and yet they still feel that their low back might feel tight or their hips feel tight. Oftentimes, what they're actually feeling is that their iliopsoas has become tightened and the muscle beneath is shortened. So the iliopsoas, when we say tight versus short, tight refers more to the fascia, and short refers to the length of the muscle. So the muscle itself can't lengthen if the fascia is tight. So if you were to think of, say, a raisin or a shrink wrap, if I shrink wrapped something so very tight, that's the fascia. There's no way it can expand unless it got more pliable. So by making the fascia more pliable, the muscle beneath can release. So I've talked about that multiple times throughout this, but I'm trying to explain it to you in different ways so that you have techniques to explain it to a student in different ways, because different people connect with different terms. So when we're talking about our iliopsoas, one of the things that I love to use that's fairly portable is my rock ball. So like I said, you can get one of these on Amazon. Another ball that you could use that would be similar in size would be a softball, not a baseball, but a softball. And there's one more way, using a Pilates ball. Now this one will not dig into the muscle as much. So for students who maybe aren't ready for a more aggressive release, these are very commonly used in a lot of studios and around. You can easily lay on them. So either one you're using, you want to, I'm going to hold this one in place here right now just so it doesn't leave. You want to place it just above the iliac crest. You want to draw a line from your belly button to your iliac crest. Then you place it right here. This is the area you're going to roll around on. You're not going to come over here and just start rolling your whole belly. No, it's very defined from here, belly button, to iliac crest. This is where you want the pressure and the release to happen. If you were using this ball, I would center it here, just doing some deep breathing. It doesn't actually need to be rolled around on, but just laying on it for about a minute, and then laying on it for about a minute. This one is handy, and I often use it in my classes at the end of class. For example, when I teach my mat Pilates class, I know that a lot of times we've been using our abdominals quite a bit, and I want their abdominals to open up and relax, I'll go and I'll use this Pilates ball for that. So with that in mind, I'm going to go ahead and show you the rock ball technique. Bringing it down, once again, coming into that area, relaxing completely down. From here, I just start with some gentle hips side to side. And yes, mine is telling me all sorts of fun messages right now. So this area is tight on me. And I'll take some deep breathing here. Really, really deep into your belly. With each breath, you may feel the ball sink or your body sink lower into the ball. That's a good thing. From here, after you've taken maybe 10 or so deep breaths, you're going to come up, bend and straighten that same leg. Maybe you'll do that about 10 times. Then you can take that leg side to side. Start feeling that range of motion in there. Really getting into that pocket just in front of that hip area. Sometimes I even take the opposite leg if I want a little more aggressive approach. And I'm still on the right side, but I'm using the opposite leg to help that rocking and range of motion. So after I've done that side, I would obviously come up and then switch over to my other side and continue on. So benefits of our iliopsoas. So if we've been driving a lot, you can see right now this area is shortened. It's not open. Sitting at a desk, once again, shortened, not open. So we are opening, releasing the tightness in the area. Then after that, you can visit stretching techniques like we do in our yoga class. And that will be a more effective way to get that stretch that we're looking for, thus increasing your range of motion. So finally, we want to talk about our glutes. Oftentimes you'll hear that someone feels like they have tight glutes. Sometimes I'll hear that people say, oh, my glutes are tight and it's pulling on my low back. Usually, it's not your glutes that's pulling at your low back. It can be your iliopsoas. So you need to think about if your low back is hurting, opening up this area. But if you truly have some glute issues going on, like sometimes I have some clicking that starts to happen, or my sacrum becomes unhappy, then I want to use my lacrosse ball to go ahead and release the glutes. Now this, for me, is the more aggressive way. An additional way would be using the foam roller. So I'm going to show foam roller briefly. I come up, get into my glute, get into a figure four. Little bit of rolling, little bit of side to side. Oftentimes I try to reach with the opposite arm. If you're really good, you can balance and do it with no arms on the floor, but I don't have that balance level. You'll get deeper if you do that, but I'm in that glute and I'm not on my tailbone or my sacrum. I'm in the pocket in my glute area. I can also open and close. There's that clicking that I talked about that's there sometimes for me. Then gently roll off. Now, if I'm looking for a deeper release that really targets not just the entire glutes but the piriformis, then I tend to reach for my lacrosse ball or perhaps my rock ball. Bring it down, get it into the pocket, and you can tell by my face that it is a hurt so good, and I want to stay here again for about a minute or two until I feel that release. Remember to take deep breaths, because if you breathe, you can release some of that tension. in your body. Visualize that muscle lengthening. Visualization helps a lot. You can even take a little side to side. Usually I do this, and right after I do it, I tend to do a figure 4 stretch or a pigeon pose to help that glute stretch even further. So I release the tightness, then I lengthen that short muscle by adding in the stretching technique. So, a couple of additional things that I'm not going to show today, but I want to mention. This is by TheraBand, and it's called a flex bar. If you have tight forearms, or if your triceps, I lost that for a second there. If your triceps, I wanted to say traps, which is here, triceps are tight and you feel like maybe you're losing some range of motion in your shoulder, you can get onto a countertop. Usually I use a countertop height, and I roll like this and like this, almost like I'm rolling out a rolling pin or cookie dough. Then I'll put my arm and I'll roll in this area using that countertop height, and thus I get release in my arm. This can often help you with tennis elbow, golfer's elbow. So a lot of times that pain coming from your elbow is just a pulling that's coming from muscles above and below. So by releasing these muscles above and below, then you can focus on releasing that elbow. Another technique, often hard to get to yourself, is I want to get this area, but I can't get the pressure necessary for this area. So I'll put my arm down and then I'll call an assistant over, aka my husband, and I'll have him roll that area for me with a little bit of pressure with this tool. This is available also on Amazon. It's a little bit flexible. It comes with a guide where there's some exercises where you wring it out to help your wrists as well. But that's a common area in a lot of yogis, so you may want to think about having one of these tools one day as well. Peanut, real quick, things I do with the peanut. Peanut goes on either side of the spine. You'll notice that there's a dip in the middle of the peanut. That's where my spine goes because I don't roll on my spine. I use it from here to here. I never use a peanut in my low back area. Okay, I only use it from here to here. Okay, I don't roll on the peanut. I go little by little and I just do a gentle rocking. It's just a gentle rocking that happens on the peanut. If I need to use it for my low back, then I need a chair. And I need to put my legs up, tabletop, knees stacked over hips. I can lift, put the peanut, and then take my knees side to side with a gentle rocking. Once again, you would never put that on any bony areas. You don't want to press into your sacrum or your spine or your hip joints. But this is a peanut. With all those tools in mind, now you practically have a huge shopping list. I hope that you have learned something today and that this can be as useful for you as it has for me. The way I found myofascial release was I was in a lot of pain because I was an aerialist. I trained quite often. I competed and I needed something besides just a visit to the chiropractor or another practitioner that I was having to pay for constantly. So I learned about myofascial release and I went and took a lot of courses in this, and I became eventually a certified flexibility therapist. That initially wasn't my intention. It was to help myself. And in helping myself and seeing how much this works for me, I'm able to teach now 10 to 15 classes a week regularly. And instead of going off to my chiropractor or going off to my massage therapist, I use these techniques amongst others that I know in order to help release my own body, I know what I need. Now, with that in mind, I drink a lot of water afterwards, just like you got a massage, because you want to introduce new liquid, new and flush that stagnant fluid out of those muscles and fascia area. So a lot of water is important. Don't drink alcohol and do this. It's a bad idea, okay? So other than that, I really have no more information for you, but I wish you the best in your yoga journey.